Lakeland Currents, your public affairs program for north central Minnesota. Production funding for Lakeland Currents is made possible by Bemidji Regional Airport, serving the region with daily flights to Minneapolis-St. Paul International Airport. More information available at bemidjiairport.org. Closed captioning for Lakeland Currents is sponsored by Nisswa Tax Service, tax preparation for businesses and individuals. Online at nisswatax.com.
Hello, welcome to Lakeland Currents. I'm Carl Sewell. Winter driving in Minnesota is a perennial risk with snowy and icy conditions that always make driving dangerous. But some things are changing. The technology in modern vehicles improves every year, and our roadways themselves are becoming safer. Today, we're talking about transportation and safety in northern Minnesota's roads with two guests, Lieutenant Brad Norland of the Minnesota State Patrol and TJ Melcher from the Minnesota Department of Transportation. Thank you both for joining us.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks for having us.
So to start off today, maybe we could get from each of you something of the big picture of the long-term trends. How is safety and driving and the dangers of Minnesota winter changing over the years?
I think it's getting better as time's going. I think technology is assisting us in helping to keep our roadways safe. Back in 2003, there's a group called Towards Zero Deaths that started. At that time, there was 658 people that had died on our roadways in 2003. And this group got together and said, hey, we need to do something to help make our roadways safer for our friends and families and for us. And so they formed this Towards Zero Deaths group. Well, as of last year, they had cut the death total in our roadways in half. So
from 2003 till last year?
Yep, to last year. And so our fatalities are trending downward, which is a great thing. That means there's 300 more people that were at Thanksgiving just the other day with their families and just making things safer for us, which is a fantastic thing. And we all want that. We all want to be able to enjoy holidays without having to grieve, loved ones not being there,
Yeah, and where this came from, so Towards Zero Deaths, this program brought together all these different agencies that have a piece in traffic safety. So you can see law enforcement. What happens when you see a sheriff or a cop on the side of the road? People slow down. They change their behavior. So law enforcement has a piece in increasing the safety on our roads. From MnDOT's perspective, engineering, what can you do to make that road a bit safer, to make the turning conflicts or take away people's ability to make so many different maneuvers on those areas. You look at EMS, so emergency medical services, emergency response. If you are involved in a crash, how quickly can they get you to a hospital or a level 1 trauma center? And especially in rural areas in outstate Minnesota, that's a big piece. So they can help to increase the safety on our highways if you do get into a crash. And then the last piece is that education piece. And so educating drivers and younger drivers and older drivers and really everyone, that personal responsibility of having just to use the road in a safer manner. And so TZD brought together these 4 E's, so enforcement, engineering, education, and EMS. And they've really led the nation. So a lot of other states have contacted Minnesota to try and to emulate that model and bring it to their own states so they can reduce those traffic crashes that happen as well.
I'm just curious, the Towards Zero Death group you said, who is the coordinator? Where did that come from? Was that a legislative thing? Is that just a citizens group? Who is the group you're talking
I think it's just more a lot of people that were had in leadership positions in Department of Public Safety, Office of Traffic Safety, MnDOT, a couple other departments down in the cities that said, hey, we need to do something about this because there's too many people dying on our roads. And I just thought of something also is that as far as the enforcing new laws have come into place that have helped in our battle towards saving people's lives. We have a primary seatbelt law, which we didn't have back in 2003. We have that now. Which means we can stop people for just if we see them not wearing their seatbelt. The alcohol limit used to be 0.10 for it's people to get arrested for DWI or processed for DWI or driving while impaired. Now that's 0.08, and who knows, in a few years that probably might drop down to even a 0.05, which is it's all about saving lives, and that's going to be. People don't like to get arrested for driving while intoxicated, whether it's drugs or alcohol, but the next morning, I think they're probably going to be thankful that at least I'm okay. And that's what we want. We want people to see that side of things instead of, I'm in jail, great.
Yeah,
it's
another
all
law was the distracted driving law.
Hands-free.
Hands-free
law
is the most recent one that I've seen a big push for.
And that's not a big one because that is, basically it's an epidemic. Everybody's got cell phones now. And, we're all accustomed to constantly checking. If the phone dings, hey, I'm looking at it.
Yeah.
And that
it's a
stop.
conditioned response that you have,
Exactly.
that you hear, see that notification or just the flash.
Yep.
You almost automatically do that.
Yeah, and it doesn't stop because when you get into a car. There's a lot of people that, there's some people that turn the volume off or put the phone. I've heard of people putting it in the back seat or even in the trunk, so they aren't tempted to grab that or look at it. But a lot of people aren't doing that. That's if they hear it or feel it vibrate, they're looking, because it is a conditioned response, and that super dangerous. Because they say the average person, when somebody reads or sends a text, it takes an average of 5 seconds. Well, if you actually sit, and not while you're in a car, but at your desk or at home, at the kitchen table, whatever, and actually close your eyes for 5 seconds, actual 5 seconds, that's a long time. I do that with a lot of the driver's ed classes that I go to. I'll have the kids close their eyes when I tell them to start, and I'll actually count out 5 seconds and then open them. And I ask them, now, would any of you do that when you're driving a car? No, absolutely not. Everybody says no way. But that's really what we're doing when we are taking our eyes off the road. We're looking down at something or not paying attention, is that we're closing our eyes, basically. And that these are the people that we're meeting on the highways. You could be the best driver in the world, but you can't control what's going on in those other vehicles that you're meeting. And that's why we really need to pay attention, because we want people to pay attention so that they can see, oh, there's a hazard coming. Why is this person crossing in the center line? We want them to be able to take evasive maneuver and actions to get out of the way of those that aren't paying attention, that are endangering our lives on the roads.
Yeah, and especially in the wintertime. So the adage of everything is fine until it's not is what comes up for it. And as you think about it, if you're on the road all by yourself, you may be able to drive at 55 or 60, whatever that speed limit is, if it's a bit icy out. But the minute that something happens, or the moment that something happens, whether that's a deer that comes out, or whether it's somebody else that drifts across, or a pedestrian, or you just weren't paying attention or hit an icy spot, the moment that one of those things happen, you can no longer keep control of yourself at that speed. And so it's up to us to understand that, and personal responsibility of just driving for what the conditions are allowing us. And not just with you on the road, but understanding that you're part of a bigger system. And that you need to watch out for those other drivers as well. You bring up the using cell phones. It's interesting too, as I go speak to the driver's ed classes, I have some photos that I show them, and it's that education piece of what we're demonstrating to other people. And it's a picture of my daughter. She's about 4 years old, and she's in a little Hot Wheels vehicle. And so she's driving her Hot Wheels vehicle around the yard, but she has a cell phone with her. And so she's on herself, and it's not even a real phone. It's it holds candy, And so I stopped her. I'm like, Tegan, what are you doing? She's like, oh, I'm like, Mommy. I'm like, okay. So that's education at home. So just the behaviors that we do, it feeds onto our children. And what was interesting too with Tegan, a little bit later after that, she started texting and driving. Again, on a play phone, she's texting and driving it just blew my mind that this is the way that she was playing. And so it's important that we demonstrate as parents and as citizens, that we demonstrate good behavior to everyone else, because that's where it comes down from. You see seatbelt laws or seatbelt enforcement or seatbelt compliance, more and more people are wearing their seatbelts just because it is a normal thing now.
Yeah, it becomes almost a cultural taboo, and I think that's where we need to make distracted driving, is what I'm hearing you say.
It's going to take some time to get there, but that's exactly so, because it doesn't seem dangerous to be distracted while you're driving.
Yeah.
And folks will say, well, I've never gotten into a crash, so I can do it. I can multitask for it. Well, it's anecdotal because we can see all the numbers. We can see that it's not a matter of if you're going to get into a crash. You're going to. It's just a matter of those set of circumstances come together. Does it happen to be at that moment that you drift from the side of the road? It happens to be at the same time that some mom is walking her child along the side of the road. Yeah. It's a crazy set of circumstances, but these are the things that happen, and they have devastating effects.
So there's that educational component that you mentioned before that we're seeing there, where it's not just educating the individuals who are going to be out driving, but we do have to change the culture around that, I think, is what I'm hearing on this. Whereas if you go to a different culture, like I was in Europe last summer for a couple of weeks, and the culture around drinking and driving there is absolutely taboo, where they're not considering the limits or anything. There's just, it's everyone I was with, there was somebody who was not drinking at all, and that was the person who would drive. And it's even a little bit different there, and you've seen it change here over the years, and we need to get there with distracted driving, I think, also, where people in the car would be shocked and horrified to see the driver pick up a phone or something.
Yep. Yeah. And we're trying to enforce the laws the best we can, but we're never going to enforce our way out of all these fatals. We definitely are. I feel like our agency and law enforcement in general are transitioning more to the educational side of things. Also, we need to get into the schools and just start pounding these messages, traffic safety messages, into these kids' heads, and not just we automatically think driver's ed class because that's when they start driving, but it's already too late by that point. Just for what you were saying with your daughter, we need to get into those younger grades and start pounding those messages in there, because if moms and dads or brothers and sisters aren't modeling good driving behavior, we need to get to those kids at a younger age so that we can start instilling the right choices, just making the right choices with these kids.
And maybe getting the kids to pressure their parents to make better choices, I think, would be another angle on that. So in addition to the distracted driving and the education that we've talked about a little bit, what are some of the other aspects that we need to make improvements on in driving safety and awareness around driving, especially as we're coming up on winter time?
Equipment on vehicles is one thing. We handle, now that we're into the winter months, with the roads not being, it can be icy some days. We need to make sure we have good tires. We've handled a few crashes where I've read in reports now where the tire tread is a factor, because there's just not enough tread on that tire to be able to handle the different changing conditions on the roadways. Have good wipers. Make sure you might have to change them. Maybe you need to change them every year, depending on. You just got to make sure you inspect them every now and then. The lights. Make sure your lights are all working. Your headlights, your taillights, brake lights. Keep those in good working order.
And one thing I started doing only recently, and it's made it, is I go to the bucket at the gas station and wash my headlights off every time I do that now, and it's made such a difference. And I don't know why I never did that before, but just little things like that.
It could save your life, and you never know.
And you look at, so from MnDOT's perspective, we'd have two pieces of it. One would be from the roadway design, and the other one would be for, in the winter, snow and ice operations, so snow plowing.
Yeah, I want to get into both of those things a little bit. So.
To kind of tie on and keep our highways safe, so from an engineering perspective, and Brad just touched on the education of getting into those drivers even before they start driving and developing those norms. Here's what's interesting is you start to really look at corridors and the way that people drive. So say we want to come in and make a change to something, and then oftentimes the comments that you'll hear usually follow the same sort of premise. Well, if drivers only stopped for the stoplights, or if drivers only slowed down, or if drivers just used their left-hand turn signal, this would solve the problem. Or if drivers weren't driving distracted, it wouldn't be so dangerous. But isn't it interesting that as you break down each of these comments, they're not road-based, they're all driver-based, and the way that people use the road. So as MnDOT comes in and tries to improve safety and come up with corridor fixes, it's really designing the road so that way it gets used in a better manner. And so it accounts for the fact that people can be not necessarily paying the most attention, or they, not getting themselves to the right speed. If we just put up a signal doesn't slow people down. A green light doesn't do anything. A red light, if you see it, you'll slow down. And yellow, sometimes you go slower, or sometimes you go faster. But for instance, if you replace a roundabout in that particular intersection, it's designed, it slows people down naturally. So now we've controlled actually what drivers are doing coming into this intersection rather than just putting up this arbitrary signal or sign trying to hope that they'll do it. So that's a part of people understanding that the way that they drive the road is really what's driving everything, right? So if they slow down, or if they use their left-hand signals, or if they stop for those stoplights, you wouldn't have to fix anything at all. But the fact that those things are happening just means that, perhaps there's a better way that we can design this road. So that helps feeds into the safety piece. In the wintertime, so along with the tips that Brad had shared with us, in part of MnDOT's response is there's a balance that we have to figure out. Because the easy answer is, hey, just throw out a bunch of salt and that'll melt all of the ice out there, and then now we can drive 60, because people just don't want to slow down. And that's the biggest thing, is they have to understand it's going to take them longer to get where they want to go. They have to slow down in the wintertime, because the answer isn't to throw out a bunch of salt out there. We have to be good stewards of the environment. We have to be good stewards of fiscal dollars. And just throwing a bunch of salt out willy-nilly isn't doing either of those things.
I've been curious about that, about salt in particular. How has that's changed over the years, in recent years? Are they using different chemicals for it than they used to?
Yeah,
It's
so
the blue stuff you see now, and I don't know what it is.
So they do a few different things. One is they'll never, I won't say never, they often don't use just a straight salt by itself. So they'll usually mix it with sand, or with other types of compounds like calcium chloride. So it's still kind of it has the effects of salt, but instead of using all of the chloride properties of it, it can use like either beet chemicals or sugar chemicals to help replicate what salt does. And that's lower the freezing temperature of that ice, which is the same thing as saying it melts it, but it doesn't actually heat it and melt it. It just lowers that freezing temperature. But salt becomes very ineffective the colder that it gets. And so that's what makes it difficult up here in Minnesota. So the science behind it, so at about 20 degrees, you can have 1 pound of salt and it'll melt 7 pounds of ice. And then by the time you get to about 0 degrees, 5 degrees, right in that window, you get it to about a 1-to-1 ratio. So now it's 1 pound of salt to melt 1 pound of ice. So it doesn't go near as far. So it costs significantly more just to clear off that same amount of ice. And then as you get to about 15 below 0 to 20 below 0, it's practically negligible. So really it's useless. You might as well just
put the sand out there.
Well, in the sand, it doesn't adhere to the roadway very well. It doesn't last very long either. So really when it gets to be that types of conditions, we need some more environmental help in it. And it's just that people have to understand that it's slippery conditions and they have to slow down. Because just putting salt on it isn't gonna fix it at all. Yeah.
Is MnDOT using less salt now than they used to?
They're trying to use it more effectively. Yeah, and so they'll use a brine solution. So they'll use a saltwater solution that's 23.3% salt. And that brine solution does a couple of things. Is it makes you don't have to use as much to get on the road surface. And since it's wet, so you spray it on wet, so you're starting to activate that salt already because you already have the water that is there. And then also because it's been wet, it sticks it to the road surface. Because oftentimes much of the salt, if you just use the straight salt to drop it out of the spinner, out of the back of that snowplow, that salt just bounces off the road surface and then it can bounce down into the shoulder, down into the grass and things. And so it was just a waste anyways. Passing semi-trucks or large vehicles create a lot of wind, and that blows the salt off of that road surface too. So salt can be very ineffective on high-speed roads because it won't stay there. But a salt brine can help you keep it on that road surface. And so they'll use that salt brine, they'll spray it on the road surface before a snowstorm, and that's to pre-treat the roads. And so you've already got a little layer of salt underneath before that ice starts to accumulate. And so that helps you prevent that.
And has there been any changes in road surfaces and surfacing in the last few years? I imagine there have been.
And Minnesota kind of is also a nation leader too in trying to be innovative in their pavement technologies. So like down in Monticello on 94, you've got the test facility where, off the interstate, you're either on these 2 lanes or they've got 2 other lanes that are next to it. And that allows them to test out different pavement mixes, pavement designs, different road striping and paint and things, and because our winters are so hardy, and so trying to figure out what can last the longest, because it's very hard on our roads. It's very hot in the summertime and very cold in the wintertime, and so that has a big effect on our roads. But to answer your question, yes, and it all has to do with the types of vehicles that are going to be on there. How heavy are they? Is it farming equipment that they need to get down there, or is it really just a rural highway, or is it an interstate that's going to have 40,000 vehicles? All of that would really dictate what that mixed design, that final design, is going to look like.
All right, and I think you mentioned another component there about snow removal and the
Yeah.
snow plows, and how are those playing in? What's new with all of that,
So-
or what do people need to know?
So MnDOT has, in northwest Minnesota, our District 2, so we have 68 plows in our district, and we want to be able to give people the ability to make better choices in the wintertime. And so we've got the 511mn.org, so the 511 website or mobile app, and that allows somebody to be able to hop on, and then wherever they're going to be traveling in the state, it'll give you up-to-date road conditions. So whether they're partially covered or whether they're snowy covered, icy, or whether travel not advised. Over the last snowstorm that we had, especially across northeastern Minnesota where they got hit the worst in Duluth, you could hop on and you could look at, and it would tell you which roads are closed. But then they also have cameras that are available, so you can just get a look at on the ground itself.
Yeah, and I've been to the site, and there's a really good map there that's just visually immediate.
Yeah.
With colored, all the roads are colored red or blue.
Yeah.
Do not travel.
And those are our sub-area supervisors, are really the experts in the snow removal for that. And so they're the ones that update that site from MnDOT's perspective for it. Some of the other technologies that we do is we've added on what's called a tow plow. So it's essentially a snow plow that's on a trailer. And so it takes a single snow plow and it turns it into like a tandem, so like two snow plows. And where you get advantage out of that is like to the east of us between Cass Lake and Deer River, where they've got those passing lane opportunities. And so that's one of the locations where we utilize this. And it allows just that one snow plow. And when he gets to those passing lanes, he can initiate that trailer plow, and then they can just clear off both of those lanes then at the same time, rather than having to come back and make a second pass. And so it reduces your costs, and especially in locations like that. We have a second one that's on the eastern or on the western side of our district in the Red River Valley, just because of the amount of snow and blizzard-like conditions that they get. So we keep that one in that area. We also have expanded use of what's called icebreakers, and these look like a big drum on the front of the snowplow with some metal spikes that are on it. And what it does is that metal drum goes down on the road surface, and those metal spikes dig in to the ice that has adhered to it, and to help you break up that ice and then be able to get those off. The worst type of environment, or the worst type of scenario in regards to how a road is going to be, is if you get a wet, heavy snow, so like a high moisture content, and then that would be on like a Monday morning, and then the temperatures drop to below 20 degrees below zero. If that scenario happens, the road conditions are going to be in bad shape, and there's not a lot that we can do about it. When MnDOT pushes out messaging that, listen, if you can delay your travels or not come into work today, it's not because simply that Minnesotans can't drive correctly in the snow. Sometimes we feel like we're too hardy and we go drive even maybe in situations where we shouldn't. But when you're trying to keep a road clear, the less traffic that uses it is going to make it a lot easier to get the ice off of it. Because as snow falls, as the traffic drives on that snow, it compacts it down onto that road surface, and that ice compaction really just bonds to that to the road surface, and it's very hard to scrape off. And so if it gets to be very cold after that, ice or salt isn't helpful in that scenario. So it's very difficult to get them into an easy driving condition after that.
Well, there's a lot to it.
Yeah.
I've noticed now, technology is also helping us with getting this information out. Like weather reports are coming out way in advance. I've noticed the school districts or superintendents are more willing to either call off school or 2 hours late which really helps because then there's less traffic out there and less opportunity to put our kids in danger.
It
Which is
used to almost be a
fantastic.
point of pride of, oh, we didn't cancel
Yeah.
school
Right.
when it was 20 below or something, but
Right.
But now we know better.
Yeah.
And again, not just from the safety perspective, but from the engineering perspective, from the snowplow perspective, it's a lot easier for us to clear those roads, to get the system in a more usable shape for everyone if there's less people on it. And having those schools delay that actually just helps that overall snowplow response, as well as the safety piece.
Right.
Okay, so in closing, as we're wrapping up here, I'd like to ask each of you, from MnDOT and from the Department of Public Safety, what are the priorities going forward? If you could say, in order to improve traffic safety in Minnesota, driving safety, what's the one thing we should really focus on from each of your perspectives
Well, I
over
think
the next few years?
From our perspective, it's we just want people to make good choices. Make a good common sense decision. If you don't need to go because of weather, don't go. Your life isn't worth risking if you go out in bad weather. But we want people to just drive appropriate for the conditions, drive the speed limit or appropriate in the wintertime. Always wear your seatbelt and make sure everybody else in that car is buckled up. Spread that message to your family and then your friends. Model good driving behavior. Don't drive distracted. Pay attention because you need to focus because just assume the other people are not paying attention on the roadway. And we want you to be able to see the hazard coming at you so you can try to get out of the way. And then also, don't drive impaired. Have a plan. Have somebody you can depend on to call if you don't feel like you're able to drive. Buzz driving is drunk driving. It all comes back to making good decisions, good choices.
Yeah, and MnDOT's top priority is safety, and that comes into roadway design. But in the wintertime, that personal responsibility piece of understanding that you have to drive for the conditions. And again, if you're on that road all by yourself, maybe you can drive faster, but you have to understand that you're part of that larger system and that you have to slow down. So give plows room to work. We all want the same thing, and that's for you to be able to get home to your family. So the collaboration that all of the agencies use is the same thing that motorists need to use when they're on the highway. They're not there by themselves. They're part of a bigger system, and we all have to work together.
Yeah.
All right, well, I think we're going to leave it there today. Thank both of you. That was a good conversation. Thanks for joining us tonight.
Thank you.
Yeah,
And
this is
thank
great.
you, those of you at home, for joining us on Lakeland Currents.